When I was 6 or 7 years old, I remember being completely obsessed with Legos. You know those plastic building blocks that came in all different colors, shapes, and sizes? Yeah, those. You probably still have some in your attic or maybe your basement or somewhere in your closet buried away. Maybe you gave them away to another kid. But I was obsessed with those plastic blocks. I always tested the limits of what can be built. And I remember specifically always building like building a house of all different kind of blocks. I didn't have any of those fancy like Lego men. Like I didn't have any different shapes. All I had was those 4x4 blocks, 8x2 blocks, like those regular shapes. And I used to basically build with those. And I always remember trying to build a little garage next to the houses just so, you know, I'd have space for the cars. You know, I was into cars at a young age. And I always used to build a little garage extension next to the house. And, you know, used to get quite creative with those Legos. Used to make irregular structures. So basically a little tiny block on the bottom, like, you know, the 1x1 block. And then trying to build upwards and make it kind of irregular so it balanced. So make this side different to the other side and make sure it balanced. And then sometimes make it like really symmetrical and make all these different shapes. And really get creative with it. That was at the age of 6 or 7. Then I started like, you know, on the other hobbies I had was making paper airplanes. So I remember my mum used to work in McDonald's and she basically had a lot of these advertisements that she used to take home just, you know, back from work. And they're like A3 sheets of paper, like a little bit smaller than A4, basically half of an A4 sheet of paper. And, you know, it had like a glossy, smooth finish to the paper because, you know, they're advertisements. So I used to have an abundance of those, like stacks. So the way I would use them is make paper airplanes and fold them in all different ways and basically trial and error. So the way I would do it is I make like 10 or 15 or maybe even 20 paper airplanes, put them all in a wee bucket, or maybe like just, you know, carry them into the balcony, like all 20. I'd make 20 different airplanes, put them all into the balcony, open the balcony window. I used to live on like the top of a 7-story, it was a 9-story building, but I used to live on the 7th story. So quite high. Used to open the balcony window and basically launch all of these paper airplanes outside of the window and seeing which one would come first, like which design is superior, which design works the best. And then if, you know, if one flied really well, I would try and improve on this design. I'd be like, okay, so this design worked really well. Maybe I'll try and fold the wings a little bit more and maybe like, you know, make it more aerodynamic some way. And that was me at 6 or 7 years of age. So I remember even my parents used to come into the room. I used to build Legos and just make all of these structures. And my mum or dad just be like, whoa, this is impressive. Like, Rob, well done. Like, you're actually making some decent things. And they always thought that I'll be some kind of architect in the future, which didn't happen. So, yeah, I was like praised for doing this. And, you know, it felt pretty good. Like, as a kid, it feels good whenever your parents give you this approval. So, basically, after 7 years of age, maybe I was 7.5, was the first time that I was introduced to proper gaming. So I saved up for a number of years. I saved up probably for like 2 years, just getting birthday money, you know, putting it away into a little piggy bank. And it was like a clay piggy bank that I used to put like 1 or 2 not even euros or not even dollars, they were less, maybe like 50 cents into this piggy bank, and it accumulated to quite an amount. So basically it was probably maybe $150 in total in this piggy bank. And then what I wanted was a PlayStation 1. I didn't even know it existed, but my parents told me about it and I was like, yeah, cool, like video games, you know, sounds really fun. And my dad gave the rest of the money that was needed for the PlayStation 1, so gave me basically what was missing. And I remember my dad came home with this PlayStation 1, you know, brand new in the box, and had like a lot of games as well. Basically those games were pirated because I remember there's no graphics on the front of the games, and the boxes were empty, like empty CD boxes. I think they were probably MP4, but doesn't matter. They were pirated games, so you couldn't really see what game you're playing. It was like the name of the game was printed you know, in letters on the front of the CD. This way you kind of knew what you're playing. So my dad came home with like 30 games, maybe even more. And over like a few weeks, like he kept bringing more games to the house. So I was well entertained. So this was really the first time I was introduced to some kind of video games. And, you know, back then you're thinking those were the best graphics ever. Like, they were so good. Like, you played this on this big square TV that, like, whenever you touched it, you know, it was, like, fizzy. So, yeah, it was a really fun time getting introduced to video games. But one thing happened as I got introduced to those video games. My creativity went out the window. I stopped playing Legos. I stopped making my paper airplanes. And I stopped being creative. I didn't need to be creative anymore because I had another outlet, I had another activity that I could do. And I mean, playing video games is way more stimulating, way more dopamine filled than folding paper airplanes. So one thing happened once I was introduced to those video games. I started misbehaving. And, you know, I speak like a proper adult here, but I was misbehaving as a child. So in this same balcony that I used to launch the paper airplanes out of, my parents used to collect glass bottles in the corner of the balcony. You know, so the glass bottles could be collected and you could give them in to a shop, basically in exchange for money. I think like 25 cents per bottle was what you're given if you bring them back. And I seen those bottles and I was kind of eyeing them up. And I made myself a little challenge, you know. There was a swing set, maybe like 50 meters away from the building that I used to live in, like a metal swing set. It had like 4 swings in a row. So I basically thought it would be a good idea for me to pick up those glass bottles. There was maybe like 25 of them, maybe more. Pick up those glass bottles and launch them as far as I could and basically throw the glass bottle as far as I could. Now, instead of paper airplanes, I'm using glass bottles. So, I mean, I don't know if this is me just being a kid or was this like complete mental retardation from playing all of these video games. Because I mean, I used to play like 5, 6, 7 hours a day probably because my parents didn't really put a time of how long I could actually play. Like, I had freedom of will, if you say. My parents didn't really have a strict regime that said like, oh, you can't play any more video games, Rob. You know, you have to like get away from the video games. Like, no one knew that they're damaging for your brain or they could cause any kind of negative impact. So yeah, that was the time that I used to basically for fun throw glass bottles outside of my apartment window or through my apartment window from the 7th story and try and hit a metal swing where children play and dogs run around. So that was the kind of mental illness period for me that started from playing all of these video games. And I mean, it was a downhill spiral from then. I kind of went into school at that time and the first year went okay. Then my parents left the country for a better life, you know, in search for a better life. And I started misbehaving even more because I had no guidance. I had no tutoring. There was basically my grandmother that was looking after me and, you know, I pretty much did whatever I wanted to. I could play the PS1 for as long as I wanted to and watch as much TV as I wanted to. But this did something to me. Basically, I was not creative from this point onwards. I didn't need to be creative because I was satisfied in what I was doing. My brain was satisfied. I got enough dopamine. I got enough stimulation for my brain, so I didn't need to seek outwards to make anything of my own, to create ideas like I used to. And this is within all of us. We all have ideas. We all have creativity, but it's taken away from us, from this hedonism, from this seeking of pleasure, distractions, from all of this dopamine seeking, and it takes away our creativity. It does something really, really negative to our brains. So yeah, from this point onwards, up until pretty much adulthood, being addicted to video games, I did not have any need to be creative anymore. And I didn't really have any good ideas. I didn't really progress too much. I regressed. And obviously I'd play outside with, you know, friends. And those were the times of, you know, peak creativity when you're like spending 10 hours outside on a nice summer's day. Obviously, you'll kind of get detox from all the video games you used to play and come up with some games, like come up with some maybe like different ways to kick a football and maybe come up with a game or two with the football. But there was nothing outside of that. There was no creativity in terms of me maybe practicing an instrument or being interested in practicing an instrument. There was no interest except from an interest in easy pleasure, which was video games. So what kind of point am I trying to make in this video? Why you as the viewer should be concerned about this video at all? And what kind of message should you take away from this? Well, I spent too long maybe explaining my childhood, but the message you should take away from this is that creativity is being taken away from you from just consuming too much. At the moment, we have way more consumption available than the PS1, the PlayStation 1. Now we have social media, we have YouTube, we have all different types of streaming services like Netflix, and there's an abundance. Abundance is not even a word that is fitting at the moment. It's even more than that. It's like chaotic abundance of things to do and just entertainment avenues. The thing is, the more you consume, the less creative you will become. And this will accumulate. So as you consume, your brain switches off its creative side. You are no longer in need of being creative because your brain is satisfied. It's like if you are hungry, once you eat, that hunger goes away. Now, metaphorically, that hunger is your creativity. Once that is fulfilled, once that is satisfied, you have no longer a need to be creative. Now, obviously, as playing video games, you can be creative in them, but this also kills your creativity. You use it all up in that video game that really brings you no leveling up in life. Like, you can level up in life just like as you level up in a video game. Like, you can get to pretty high levels in life rather than in video games. So you have no need to level up in life because you're leveling up in video games. I can explain this in so many ways for you to try and understand this. But the general point I'm trying to make is, once you consume any type of content, any type of pleasure, any type of dopamine that you're getting from all of these sources, you do not need to be creative anymore. And creativity is probably the most satisfying thing that we have in our lives. If we are creative, we have a sense of purpose and fulfillment like no other. So once we create something, let's say I'm trying to play a melody on the guitar and I'm trying to, the guitar right there, trying to make my own melody. There's no more greater purpose that you feel or fulfillment once you actually get some nice melody and make it like one of your own. I used to make music on the computer too, like using this program called Ableton. And once I finished the song, once I actually finished the song and produced it properly and it sounded like an actual song that was played on the radio, the fulfillment that I got from that was next level. Like, it's just way different. There's no comparison to the fulfillment that you get from video games to when you actually create something of your own. Now, this goes even further. You can be creative, like just, I'm trying to create videos now. So that's my sort of creativity, one of my creativity ways. You can draw something and make a drawing of your own, like not copying something. But even if you copy something, it's something that you have made. You have fulfillment and you have a sense of purpose once you do that. But the thing is, those video games and all the other things that I've mentioned, like, Netflix and YouTube, they give you a false sense of creativity. Your brain thinks that it's creating something. It thinks that it's learning something. But in reality, it's actually not. In reality, it's taken away very, very little from what it's, seeing or interpreting from whatever you're doing. So let's say you're watching this YouTube video, or I'll give you an example. You're watching this YouTube video, but the fact is, you will probably remember only 10% of what I've said throughout the whole video. As a creator, for me, that's pretty bad because, I'm trying to spread a message. I'm trying to somehow make a point that sticks with you for good. And, you make some changes and you make an improvement in your life. And there's actually some significant positive changes in your life from that. Now, this is the goal that I'm trying to achieve, to change people's lives for the better. But the fact that you only consume consume the whole video, or maybe, if you don't have an attention span, you probably consume like 20% of the video, and then you take away like maybe 2% of what I say. Now that's not good, is it? So that gets even worse once your brain is occupied with all the other consumption. So you have not watched one video today. This is not the first and last video that you're watching today. So maybe you've watched 10 videos before this one, and maybe you'll watch 10 more videos after this one. So from like what? Let's be generous. From 10% that you've gotten away from this video, you know, the message just saying, look, the more you consume, the less you create. This is basically the message. This is numbing it down to like, you know, the very, very fine print. Or not the fine print, the opposite of that. But basically, the more you consume, the less you create, right? This is the message. I don't need to go into more further detail. Like, just interpret it in your own way. Realize what consumption means to you, because I mean, consumption means different things to different people. But the more you consume, the less you create. And creativity is the best thing you can get in life, right? This is the message I'm trying to spread. But the words around that message, you probably only get like what? So let's be generous. 10% is what you would normally get from a video. You'd remember 10%. But now that you're consuming 10 more videos on top of that, and that's again being generous, like saying 10 videos, maybe you consume like 20, 50 videos. Because that all overlaps and your brain cannot cope with the amount of information that's coming in. My video, right, the one you're watching right now, gets lost in the abundance of the 50 videos that you've just watched. So the likelihood is that you're not going to even remember what I've said in this video at all. You're not even going to remember the premise of the message. You're not going to remember what it is about. You're not going to remember the message. You're not going to remember the setting. You're not going to remember anything about the video because there's too much. Your brain cannot handle it. So again, let's try and be really, really generous. You will most likely remember only 1% of what I've said. So what is the solution to this? What is the solution to this lack of memory and this abundance of consumption? What is the solution? What should you do? Well, my number one solution for you would be to actually stop consuming everything in general. Just stop consuming all types of videos, stop consuming any sort of movies, stop consuming any sort of social media, and focus entirely on yourself. Focus entirely on doing what you are meant to do as a human being from the very, very start. Social media and all of these things and all of the other consumption like video games is the most unnatural thing that ever came about in this lifetime. Try and focus on your own creativity. Pick up an instrument, maybe pick up a pen and pencil, or a pen and pencil, pick up a pen and paper, and try and write down your thoughts. Be creative with your thoughts. Just maybe even write down what you're thinking at the moment. And this, I promise you, this will start improving over time. If you write down your thoughts right now, like 10 days later, you will be more elaborate on how you write. You'll be more mindful of what kind of message you put down on paper. Things start to improve. But the most difficult thing is to start doing something. The most difficult thing is to actually get off of your chair, to stand up and actually make an action. This is the most difficult part. To actually stop consuming and make that step forward. Anyways, I feel like I've went too much into detail in this video just for that simple message. But look, it is what it is. I hope you remember more than 1% of this video. And yeah, the message is quite simple. Stop consuming, start creating. It'll be the most fulfilling and purposeful thing that you will do in your life. And hopefully you can get the imagination and creativity of your 7-year-old self again, which would be quite cool. So, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening to the video. And yeah, as always, peace.